How would you react in an emergency? Would you even know what to do when the alarms went off? For some strange reason I can't quite put my finger on, that is a question that was very much on my mind as I prepared for this service today. And of course, it's an important question. Emergencies are situations that provoke confusion, panic, fear. And when those kinds of emotions are in play, it's easy to react in the wrong ways. And the problem with the emergency is that by definition they don't happen when you expect them. They can break out in the midst of anything, even a morning worship service. That's why we carry out drills, so we can work out how to react before an actual emergency occurs. But the reality is, we never quite know how we're going to react until we actually find ourselves in the emergency situation. Elijah had been feeling pretty good about his accomplishments. He'd engineered a confrontation between the prophets of Baal and had beaten them at their own game. He had pressed his advantage and led the people as they attacked and slaughtered the priests of the foreign god. So Elijah had been in a pretty good mood until that mood was destroyed when the messenger arrived from Queen Jezebel, the patron of the god. She was short and to the point. So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life like one of them by this time tomorrow. Well, as you can imagine, this threat set off alarm bells in Elijah's head. In some ways, he shouldn't have been surprised. He had been the first to resort to violence. He shouldn't have been surprised by receiving violence turned back against him. But of course, there's a difference between thinking that something might be a consequence and having that consequence spelled out for you in stark terms. So this was an emergency. It was not a drill. And how did Elijah react? Well, not really well. He was filled with confusion, fear, and panic. These emotions triggered that part of the brain that makes us react to danger with either fight or flight. And which option did Elijah take? He fled. Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. And let's recognize this reaction for what it is. For not only did Elijah run, he fled the country. Beersheba was about as far as you could go from the kingdom of Israel without leaving civilization. And Elijah had not finished running. And now let's be clear here. Flight is absolutely an appropriate response to a dangerous situation. It is often the very best way to react. When the building's on fire, yes, you should get out. But how you do that is important. And unhelpful reactions like panic and disorderliness can absolutely make the situation so much worse. The very worst outcomes happen in an emergency because people do not flee the scene in an orderly and calm manner. So I actually do not judge Elijah for running. But let's take a critical look at how he ran, because we might learn something that would help us to deal with the crises and emergencies we encounter in our lives. And the first thing about how I notice him reacting that is kind of problematic is this. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. So here we see what? Elijah isolating himself. And how many times have I seen people respond like that when things go wrong? For many, it's an automatic response that happens within them whenever anything happens that makes them feel vulnerable. They cut themselves off from anyone who might give them support or help. They are afraid that other people might see them struggling, that they might appear to be anything other than completely self-sufficient. The very idea that they might need help seems intolerable. The worst thing that could possibly happen. And I understand, of course, where that temptation comes from. But it doesn't help. And it often only makes a bad situation worse. Human beings were made to live together in community. We were made to need each other. And we only make things worse when we isolate ourselves because something has gone wrong. And not surprisingly, when Elijah isolated himself like this, it was when he began to spiral. And things got worse. He fell into a depression. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now, O Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." And depression is indeed always a danger when things go wrong or when times are difficult. But I think there's also a lesson for us in how Elijah handles his situational depression. You see, often we may be tempted to bottle up those negative feelings inside, to hide them from others, from God, even from ourselves. We may think that by not expressing any of those negative feelings, we are being strong, we are being faithful. But that's actually a big mistake. Holding it in, failing to express it, can make it rot, can make it fester. And that's what makes those feelings begin to turn toxic. And it can turn a situational depression into endless cycles of inescapable depression. So take note of how Elijah lets his feelings out. He didn't hesitate to express what he was feeling to God. And I know some people don't get that. They think that expressing their gripes to God means that they have lost all faith. But it's very different than that. If you ever think that, remember the example of Elijah. Remember the example of the psalmist who wrote that incredible psalm of lament that we read together today. Do not be afraid to express your negative emotions to God. God will appreciate your honesty. And God's feelings are not fragile. You will not hurt God with your genuine display of emotion. And now finally we turn to the biggest question that people often face when things go wrong in this world. That question: where is God in this disaster? I mean, I constantly talk with people who ask, why? Why did God allow this disaster to happen or that disaster to happen? They seem to think that if only they could find some divine meaning or purpose in this bad thing, that somehow that will make everything all right. But I think as Elijah's story of emergency preparedness continues, we might get a different perspective on this obsessive question. So Elijah continued his journey, and he finally came to a place called Horeb, Mount Horeb. Now, this is a very significant place, because it is the place where Moses met with God to receive the law. It's also known as Mount Sinai in some of the other stories. So really, this is the place, right? The prophet has come to the ideal place to answer the question of where God is in the midst of the events and the disasters of life. And so let us see how God answered that question. God told Elijah that God was about to pass by, and he should stand out on the mountain of God, and he would finally understand. And what happened next is really crazy. While Elijah stood there, 3 of the worst disasters you could possibly imagine passed him by. First, he was assailed by a gale-forced wind, kind of wind that destroys cities in tornadoes and hurricanes. Next, an earthquake, an even more destructive disaster. And then finally, fire. Fire, an emergency so devastating that we actually run drills so that we know what to do if one should happen, and all the time, of course, we hope that one never will. So we have here the 3 most stereotypical disasters you could imagine. So obviously now we're going to get the answer to the question, where is God when disaster strikes? Except that's not quite the answer we get, is it? Because is God in the wind? No. Is God in the earthquake? No. Is God in the fire? No. In each case, we are told that God is not in the disaster. Now, there are some things I don't think we should read into that. This does not mean that God is absent when a disaster happens or when we go through trials. For one thing, we believe in an omnipresent God. There is no place in this world where God is not. It also doesn't mean that God is not there when we go through those kinds of difficult times. On the contrary, people of faith often find in such times that God joins in us, with us in our suffering, bringing comforting and sustaining power when things are at their worst. Now, what this story is saying is that you may not always find the answer to that perplexing question of why God allowed all of this to happen in the midst of the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. In fact, we may never get that answer that people often crave. Doesn't mean there is no answer or that God doesn't have a plan, but it means that such an answer may not be given to us. And God is telling Elijah that that is okay. God is telling us that that is okay. Not knowing the answer is okay. And so the wind and the earthquake and the fire do not give us the answer when we're in the midst of them. Disasters have this way of overwhelming us so completely that all we can do is react. We may not even have time to think, much less come to a deeper understanding of why bad things happen. We may not find God amidst the disaster. Doesn't mean God isn't there. And the story of Elijah shows us, in fact, how we can become aware of God's presence. So where does Elijah finally encounter God, if it's not in the wind or the earthquake or the fire? After the fire, there came a sound of sheer silence. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And so it becomes clear that it is in the silence that God met Elijah. And I believe there's a message for you in how you navigate, how you can better navigate the disasters of life. You will find God. You will find God in the silence. And that doesn't just mean, that after the storm has passed, you'll be able to look back and discover what lessons you were meant to learn from the disaster, what new strength you may have gained by surviving it. Sure, that happens sometimes. It's wonderful when it does, but that's not what this is saying. You see, silence isn't just something that happens to you. It is a practice you cultivate in yourself and that you can bring with you into the circumstance, even into the wind and the earthquake and the fire. Cultivating silence within yourself through practices like prayer and meditation and contemplation can make it possible for the voice of God, which is always present, always seeking to lift you up, always seeking to walk with you in the wind and the earthquake and the fire. That voice of God can break through, and you can know it is there. As a result of our little drill today, perhaps you will leave with a better understanding of what you ought to do should an emergency arise in a setting such as this. That's good, useful information to take away with you. But perhaps this story of Elijah and how he came to terms with his not a drill situation can do even more to set your heart at ease. For this story teaches us how our ongoing relationship with God equips us with resilience as we face the ups and downs and the challenges that come into our lives. And may we all also, may you resolve, each one of you, to build silence into your lives. Life is so busy these days. You need to find ways to create silence. And it's something everyone can do. Using meditation techniques, which are ancient Christian practices. You can make a point of turning off the noise of your life, the constant noise in your brain that never seems to stop. And you might be surprised to discover how near God has been all along. Lord God, meet us in the silence. Let us know your presence, your power, your love, and your care. Amen.